Days turned into weeks as I waited for the next chapter of The Life of Benjamin. I was beginning to think it would never happen, or maybe that I'd somehow imagined everything. The only thing I clung to was the news reports on Colton Fisher. I knew, or at least I thought I did, that I wouldn't have seen that shoe lying in the dirt had the narrator not said something. I'd taken to checking every hour for the next chapter, even waking up several times a night to check my phone. When it finally came, I couldn't help but feel the rush of relief and jubilation as I eagerly jammed my earbuds in, like the addict I was becoming. By now, Benjamin had realised that his life seemed incomplete without the audiobook playing in the background. What was once alarming had become not only desired, but essential. It wasn't lost on him that this was the same line of thinking that justified the actions of alcoholics and drug addicts, but he told himself this was different, as every seasoned addict does. I pursed my lips, not appreciating the jabs, but not entirely disagreeing either. But with that came the truth that most addicts must confront, that the source of their pleasure would likely be the source of their destruction. Benjamin would consider kicking this new habit once and for all. Another lie addicts tell themselves, but each attempt would end with him regretfully crawling back because he knew that the only thing able to warn him of the impending nightmare was the voice in his ear. "What the fuck?" I said aloud, my heartbeat quickening. Even now, his palms began to sweat, and his heart began to pound in his chest. What nightmare could this story be referring to? Was he in danger? Could this narrator, in fact, tell him of his death? Those thoughts had only begun to cross my mind as the narrator in my ear rattled them off as nonchalantly as he'd narrated the traffic. Despite himself, Benjamin believed the narrator could, and he was absolutely correct. I pulled the earbud out of my ear and threw it on my bed. This was becoming too much for me to handle. This whole situation was already insanely bizarre, but it was different when it wasn't so macabre. And had the voice changed? It was clearly the same person, but the way he spoke now seemed a bit, I don't know, spookier. Maybe that part was all in my head. I'd considered the question before, usually while drinking with friends. Would you rather know when you were going to die, or let it be a surprise? I'd always answered that I preferred to know. That way, I could make plans and say goodbyes. But now, staring down the barrel of that exact choice, I wasn't so sure. And was it really a choice of knowing when and how I would die, or was it something that would be saved until the end? Would it be inevitable, or was it something I could change? I didn't have to look at the sneaker by the canal, but I did because that's what the narrator in my audiobook had said. Did he know that I would do that? The question, when I really got down to it, was whether this book had already been written, or was it reporting on what was happening as it happened? Or was something, this narrator perhaps, making me do these things? I thought about this and more while I showered, brushed my teeth, and got dressed for the day. I thought about turning it off and forgetting about the whole thing. But the truth was, I was terrified that something bad might happen if I didn't. Nervously, I inserted the earbud in my ear and pressed the play button on my phone once more. Benjamin was reluctant to fall off the wagon, not even a half hour after his first vow of abstinence, but he told himself he had no choice. Told himself that if he didn't press that button again, he would be lost in the dark. He went about the rest of his morning routine, brewing his coffee, mixing his breakfast protein shake, running a comb through his hair, completely unaware that these efforts were all in vain. I raised an anxious eyebrow as I stepped outside, locking the door behind me and taking an exploratory sip of my hot coffee. Stepping outside, Benjamin was then made aware that, despite his best efforts, he would never arrive to work that day. I quickly hurried to my car and started it. I'd prove this thing wrong and get to work, one way or another. I needed to prove for myself that this had the capability of being wrong. I listened to the book through my car stereo again, this time with the volume down as low as I could make it, while still being able to hear what was being said. I would have my guard up. I didn't want to miss the sound of police sirens, or the honk of a runaway semi-truck. I was just about to make my exit when suddenly, out of nowhere, a large moving van came barreling down the freeway to my right. Had I not been paying attention, I may have missed it entirely, but I'd heard another car honk at the driver and looked just in time to get over and let him pass me. I'd missed my exit, but that was all right. There were a dozen ways to get to the office. Had he been paying attention to the voice in the car stereo, Benjamin would have been forewarned about the moving truck and may not have missed his exit. "Oh, fuck off," I said to the empty car. I turned it down further and took the next exit. There was a series of side streets I could take that would get me to work with only about a 5-minute delay. My phone began to ring as I navigated the city street, and I nearly leapt out of my skin from the fright. I was way too keyed up to be driving. I picked it up from the cup holder and saw that it was my boss. My stomach twisted as I pressed the answer button and turned up the volume in my car. "Hello? Hey, Ben," she said quickly. "You haven't left for work yet, have you?" "Yeah, I'm almost there. Why?" "Don't come in today. We've got 3 people in finance that have just tested positive for COVID and 2 in workforce management. We're sending everyone home for a few days to make sure it doesn't spread around the office." "Yeah, all right," I said, perplexed. I really wouldn't make it into work today. "Don't sound so glum," my boss said. "It was going to be a slow day anyway, so as far as I'm concerned, just keep your phone on you in case we need you and go and enjoy a day off." "Thanks," I said. "I think I will. Let me know if you need anything." She said she would, then hung up. Normally, I would go back home, clean up around the house, and throw on a movie or something, but I knew that was the last thing I should do. I needed to be spontaneous, do things I wouldn't usually do. I turned into a small sandwich shop called Pete's Meats that I'd always wanted to try but never had. It was way too early to eat lunch, so that's exactly what I intended to do. 10 minutes later, I had a 12-inch Italian sub in a paper bag with a sack of homemade kettle chips sitting in the passenger seat. Normally, I'd go home to eat, or maybe enjoy my meal in the car, so instead, I pulled up a list of parks, picked one that I'd never been to, and set out. I didn't listen to the audiobook the entire way there, nor did I put my earbud in while I searched for the perfect spot for my impromptu picnic. This was incredibly out of the norm for me now, and I found comfort in that. This comfort lasted all of about 3 bites into my sandwich, which, by the way, was one of the best I'd ever had. A cool breeze danced in the trees, and I felt the sudden, unmistakable sense that I wasn't alone. The hair stood up on the back of my neck as I was acutely aware of my surroundings, the way the leaves sounded in the trees whenever the wind blew, and the thrum of traffic in the distance, the laughter of kids playing in the playground on the other side of the park. I stood up from where I sat under the oak tree and looked around. I saw a woman with running shoes, in a tank top and leggings, pushing a stroller down the sidewalk. I watched a squirrel run across the grass and up a tree. I heard a muffled voice that I wasn't immediately able to place. Looking around, I discovered it was coming from the earbuds in my pocket. I could feel my heart in my throat, and I swallowed it back down while I fished the buds out. They weren't supposed to be able to play anything unless they were in my ear. There was a little sensor that told them whether or not they were in position. I didn't have to look at my phone to know what was playing. I could hear the familiar voice I'd gotten to know well over the past few weeks, even before I inserted the bud into my ear. And, as he placed the bud back into his ear, he understood better than ever before that this addiction was not one that could simply be kicked. I took another bite of my sandwich, as defiantly as possible, trying not to let on the fear that had begun to course through my veins. He could feel the eyes on him as he chewed the last meal he would ever eat. I swallowed and again looked around for signs of anyone or anything looking in my direction. Except he wouldn't find the source of his surveillance on the ground, because it had been in the tree above him the whole time. I whipped my neck up so fast that I nearly fell over. Nothing but leaves clung to the branches above me. "No, fuck you," I said, earning a concerned glance from the woman pushing the stroller. "No, sorry, not you," I said apologetically. I threw the sandwich back in the paper and walked as fast as I could to the car. He was reminded then of a moment from his childhood, whenever he was sent to retrieve anything from the basement, especially after the sun had set. He would never run, no matter how badly the dark scared him. The light switch was on the wall adjacent to the stairs, so every time he had to go down into that room, there were always 10 steps between him and the light, 5 to get to the switch, and 5 to get back after shutting it off. He would always hurry to flip the switch on, but those final 5 steps, after shutting it off again, were always taken slowly. He felt then, as he did now, that if he ran, if he showed the dark that he was afraid while it was at his back, it would devour him. I sped home, my mind a tornado of thoughts and questions. I didn't even know that I was going to be there. How could anyone else? Was I really being followed? Or was this narrator lying to me? Was he capable of lying? As each of these thoughts crossed my mind, the narrator listed them off. I hoped for an answer to any of these things, but of course, that would spoil the surprise, so the narrator danced around the questions, like a skilled performer. I arrived home and rushed through the front door, locking it immediately behind me. The sight of the still unrepaired gouges in the door gave my stomach another hard twist. I checked the locks on my back door and windows as well. Everything was locked up tight, just as I'd left it. I went to my bedroom and locked that door as well, for good measure. Barricaded safely inside his bedroom, Benjamin contemplated his next move. He had little to go by to prove to anyone that he was being followed. The best he could do would be to lie to the police about seeing someone at the park and feeling like he'd been followed. As he considered his plan, another idea began to form. Could he force the narrator into giving him more information through inaction? If he was doing nothing of interest, would the narrator move to foreshadowing to continue the story? It was worth a shot. I sat down on my bed and closed my eyes. I focused my mind on as little as possible. No wild thoughts, no fears, nothing but a soft hum. The voice in my ear described his plan in detail, then moved around the room, describing each little trinket on my dresser, the books on the shelf, and the photographs on the wall. This went on for several minutes, and the hope that I was getting close kept pushing further forward, trying to squeeze past the deliberate focused hum I was concentrating on maintaining. How much longer would this last, he wondered. How much longer would it take before this story would progress past the present and dip its toe into the future? He expected maybe a minute or two before either the chapter would end or he would succeed. What he didn't expect, however, was the crash coming from the kitchen that shattered the silence of the house like glass. As if on cue, the sound of broken glass exploded from down the hall. I yelped in fear and surprise while the adrenaline squirted into my body. Had I left something out that could have fallen on the floor? I didn't think so, but I checked the locks, so that was the only logical explanation I could come up with. Was this enough to convince the police I had an intruder? I thought so. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and tapped on the phone icon to dial 911. Nothing happened. I tapped again, and still, nothing. The phone was frozen. I pressed the unlock button and punched in my password without a problem. The app playing my audiobook was up. I tried to close it out, and still, nothing happened. My phone was frozen. I couldn't even shut it off. Then I saw the progress bar at the top of the screen. I hadn't noticed before, or maybe it hadn't been there, but this chapter actually showed progress to completion. I had 10 minutes until the end of the chapter. Another crash pulled me from this fresh new panic and into the old one. I still had someone in my house, and I couldn't call the police. I went back to the bedroom door, promising myself that I'd take a quick peek to investigate, and if I had no explanation other than an intruder, I would barricade myself back in my room and call for help from my window. 30 seconds, I told myself. That's it. I opened my door and peered through, not expecting to see anyone unless they were standing in a specific part of the hallway. I clutched the baseball bat between bone-white knuckles and stepped carefully out into the hallway, counting to myself as I did so. I saw bits of shattered glass at the end where the hallway opened up to the kitchen. As I approached, I saw more and more glass from what I assumed was a black plate set I'd bought last summer. 15, 16, 17. The audiobook counted in my ear. I approached the end of the hall and peered around the corner into the kitchen. Bits of black ceramic peppered the floor. The cabinet where they were housed was open, hanging on a single hinge. I heard 3 loud knocks to my right that caused me to jump and simultaneously swing my bat into the corner of the wall. Drywall and paint dusted my clothes, but I didn't give it another thought. I swallowed back the bitter metallic taste that had begun to fill my mouth and carefully approached the door. One quick peek through the peephole, and if I saw someone I knew, I'd open the door and run outside. Otherwise, it was back to the bedroom. As he peeped through the hole in the door, he was reminded of that first day when he'd heard the scratching sound that had been caused by whoever or whatever had been trying to get inside his home. The only difference from then and now, other than the sound having been a knocking instead of scratching, was that the perpetrator making the sound was not outside Benjamin's house, but inside. I stumbled back, nearly losing balance in my rush to go back to my bedroom. Not 2 seconds later, I was locked inside my bedroom, pushing my dresser in the way of the door. I sat down at my desk, and I turned on my computer. Was it possible to contact the police online? I'm sure it is, but I'd never really thought about it until now. If it weren't for the adrenaline in his blood and the panic in his mind, he may have stopped to check the rest of the bedroom before sitting down. He may have looked in the closet, or under the bed, or behind the door when he first ran in. He may have known, before being told, that he was not alone in that bedroom. The narrator stood in the corner behind him, towering over him with a presence that could only be described as predatory, and Benjamin understands then, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that the moment he turns around, his life will be over. That was the last thing the audiobook said before it ended. I've been sitting at my desk now for 7 hours, too terrified to move, because in the faint reflection of my computer screen, I can see the dark shape waiting behind me.